Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we are taking a look at the development manifesto which just got released a few minutes ago. I haven't even had a chance to read these myself yet, so this is all live reaction that you'll be getting from me. If you are new to the channel, welcome to you. You can go ahead and like, subscribe, and ding the bell for more videos just like this one. If you're a veteran of the channel, then of course you're familiar with our format here. We're going to take a look at the development manifesto. If at any point in time you'd like to jump ahead or revisit any of our particular discussion points that we've got today to go over, you can do so by checking out the various timestamps that are placed conveniently above my entirely balding forehead. So let's jump right in. The development manifesto: balance in Path of Exile, Blight. Global gem levels. For a while, we've wanted to include modifiers on caster weapons that provide a multiplicative damage increase to spells, similar to how physical weapon modifiers affect the base damage of attacks. Previously, this took the form of elemental penetration and modifiers that add a portion of elements as chaos damage. But this patch will be pushing this further in the form of global modifiers to gem levels. Okay, sounds exciting. Staves were previously the go-to weapon for increasing gem levels, but their modifiers only applied to gems within the staff. Chaos-oriented one-handed weapons will now be able to roll some new modifiers that grant +1 to all fire, cold, lightning, physical, or chaos spell skill gems, not just the ones socketed in the item. Okay, that's very cool, very interesting. Scepters will not have the Chaos Spell Gem mod available. Staves will be able to roll a modifier that grants +1 to 2 instead, and have a rarer, higher tier +3 modifier available. Wow, that's huge. One-handed caster weapons will be able to roll a very rare additional mod that grants +1 to all spell gems, and the staff version of the modifier will grant +1 to 2 to all spell gems. These weapons will no longer be able to roll the equivalent modifiers that only applied to socketed gems. Wow, that's big, especially for staves. We've been talking about staves for maybe 2 years, how staves have really been out of the meta for almost the last 2 years. So that is a big buff for just for staffs across the board in terms of the usage. If you want to stack levels onto your gems, staves are going to be the way to do it, or at least the min-maxed way to do it. It's worth noting that these new modifiers don't apply to support gems. Daggers and war staves that can't roll caster mods will still be able to roll the old local elemental gem modifiers, and all non-caster weapon types will still be able to roll any existing local gem modifiers like +1 to socketed bow gems. There are a number of consequences of these changes. Because the global gem modifiers are much more powerful than the previous local modifiers, we've removed the low-level crafting recipe that added +1 to level of socketed fire, cold, lightning, chaos gems. This recipe has been replaced with a similar one that applies added fire, cold, lightning damage to spells and takes the rarity of the item into account to determine the mod's tier. There is currently no replacement for the chaos recipe. Okay, so those of us that used to level with a wand, let's say you were leveling with lightning tendrils or with firestorm or with, any of the Act 1 skills. Oftentimes what players would do is you'd go back in, you trade in a wand, plus, you'd perform the particular recipe. There's tons of videos out there showing you how to do that particular recipe, specifically so that way you could get through like Act 1 through 3 without ever having to worry about your weapon, and maybe even more because your gem levels were higher than essentially the zone. So that's now a change, but it sounds like we're going to get to add damage with rarity of the items traded in to determine the tier. So that's kind of interesting. Depending on how that goes over, that actually might be a hint as to how crafting is going to change in 4.0. That's interesting. Essence of Rage, Sorrow, and Spite now apply fire, cold, lightning, penetration, respectively, to weapons. Some uniques have been changed to apply modifiers to global gem levels. This is mostly the case on caster weapons, but some specific minion items like Bones of Allure have also received this treatment. Bones of Allure now grants +1 to all raised zombie gems and all raised specter gems. Wow! Instead of affecting the maximum minion account, as the additional maximum specters modifier was too much power from a single item. Okay, so a nerf and a buff at the same time? Interesting. Now, raising the level of these minion gems to a high enough level will grant additional maximum minions, so these modifiers are still useful. All of the changes will be shown in the patch notes. That's cool, okay? Old old supporter built uniques and game developed uniques that have been hallmarks in Path of Exile are getting updates. I like it. That's fun. Traps and mines. We've made a whole host of changes to mines that completely change how they behave and how you interact with them. As such, many systems that interacted with mines and by extension traps have been changed. You can read more about mine changes and the new mine mechanics here. The Shaper Elder modifiers that granted +1 to traps thrown or mines placed will no longer appear. They provided too much of a damage increase for a single mod. To compensate, some traps have had their damage and area growth improved. We're also introducing changes to the trap support, which now grants a higher value of trap throw speed and an increase to trap damage as the gem levels. We've included a couple of new modifiers from various kinds of crafting to improve trap and mine itemization. As an example, the Essence of Zeal now rolls a trap and mine throw speed modifier on belts. Okay, interesting. Two-handed incursion weapons with trap damage modifiers now have values higher than one-handed incursion weapons, and the bonuses apply to mine damage as well. Okay, so going back to that theme of, hey, two-handed weapons ought to just straight up have more damage on them. That's great. Well, I applaud that. Two-handed stuff, it ought to be a benefit of being two-handed. You're giving up either a quiver spot or a shield spot. There ought to be some serious benefits inherent to the weapon itself, which is good. It looks like they're doing that. We've also buffed some underutilized trap supports like the charged trap support and advanced trap support. Interesting. So those gem details will come out probably in 2 days' time, right before, the day before patch goes live. Damage over time. We've made a number of changes to improve the itemization and passive tree power for builds that use ailments to deal damage, as well as damage multipliers for burning skills. We've replaced all non-ailment chaos damage over time multipliers with chaos damage over time multiplier. So now they'll apply to poison as well. Okay, interesting. This is partially so that poison builds have a few interesting new options, but mostly to make those passives and items less painful to read. Perfect Agony has been changed significantly, and as a result, so have ailments from critical strikes. Previously, ailments from critical strikes dealt 50% more damage by default, similar to unmodified critical hit damage. The only way to modify this value was to take Perfect Agony. Now, ailments from critical strikes have 50% to damage over time multiplier by default, which will be additive with damage over time multipliers from other sources. Interesting. So, ailments got a buff, at least according to this. Now Perfect Agony lets critical strike multiplier also apply to ailment damage over time multiplier at 50% of their value, which is more potent than the previous value of 30%. This means that investing in critical strike multiplier is more rewarding for ailment builds unless you've already invested heavily in other sources of damage over time multiplier. The intent of this change is to allow critical poison builds to have more potential for damage growth and make the Keystone a worthwhile investment for any critical bleed or ignite build. Yeah, bleed and ignite, say hello. My goodness, Perfect Agony on crit bleed or crit ignite? That sounds hot, like really hot. That's interesting. Many passives that increased burning damage, poison damage, or bleeding damage now have equivalent damage over time multiplier bonuses. They've all been rebalanced as a result. We've also seen a new small cluster that gives some potent bonuses to ignites from critical strikes and another that gives bonuses to all ailments from critical strikes. There are also new item modifiers and crafting modifiers that apply to fire damage over time multiplier or ignite damage over time multiplier to give burning builds options closer to cold damage over time and chaos damage over time builds. As a result, all of these burning changes we've reviewed, all burning damage skills. Okay, interesting. So anything that's got burning on it is going to see a tweak. And we've adjusted the values. Righteous Fire in particular has received some mechanical changes. Okay, glad I'm not Righteous Fire starting. It now deals a smaller portion of your health as fire damage to enemies around you, but has an additional burning damage value that increases as the gem levels. The goal of this change is to provide more power for builds that don't invest as heavily in maximum life, and slightly less power in builds that invested the majority of their resources into getting large values of maximum life. Okay, so now if I scale up burning in some way, maybe RF is actually going to deal more damage, and I don't have to scale my life quite as hard. So that's probably a buff for softcore Righteous Fire, but not necessarily a buff for hardcore Righteous Fire. But we'll wait for patch notes to make a final judgment. We've also rebalanced some supports that affect damage over time, like the Unbound Ailment supports, Poison support, and the Vicious Projectiles support. Minions. All right. Hey, necromancers, rejoice. This is the moment that we've all been waiting for. We've made a large number of additions and changes to minions to improve build diversity and give players the options of having more control over their armies. You can read about some of those here. Almost every system in the game that touches minions has been reviewed and rebalanced or changed. Here are some of the more notable changes. All minions have had their accuracy increased. Hey, that's good news. The result of this is that a level 20 raise zombie, summoned skeleton, or raging spirit will have an 80% chance to hit a level 84 enemy if you have no minion accuracy modifiers. Okay, that's good. Golems have all been reviewed and adjusted to make more varieties of golems have competitive levels of power. Chaos, lightning, and stone golems have been improved in various ways to make them more competitive with flame and ice golems. Interesting. As well as the new carrion golem. As an example, Chaos Golem has more area of effect on its cascade, has 100% physical damage converted to chaos, and its ongoing Chaos Storm now has spell damage modifiers applied to this skill's damage over time? Okay, so we are going to see somebody that's just going to be a massive spell damage, like Chaos Golem boy. That's interesting. All of you that wanted to play a Golemancer, wave your hand and get hyped, because that looks interesting. This will be in addition to damage adjustments. If you're targeting a monster when you cast Summon Raging Spirit, the Raging Spirit created will attempt to attack that enemy first. If it can't reach the enemy or the enemy dies, it returns to its standard behavior. This is still overridden by the Deathmark support. Okay, that's good news. So SRS will be smarter now. The Minion and Totem Elemental Resistance support has been changed to Elemental Army support. It no longer applies to totems, but lets supported minions apply a minus 10% exposure based on the highest elemental damage source and grants them more elemental damage. Wow! At higher levels, it also grants more maximum elemental resistances. Oh! That's going to give Brutality a run for its money on Brutality zombies. Like, maybe I don't want to do zombies with Brutality. Go elemental. That's fit because it's got offensive and defensive abilities, and exposure is a totally different type of ailment than anything else in the game. Like, you can't stack exposure, but you can stack exposure plus pen plus ignoring nearby enemies, resistances on helms. Like, there's a lot that you can do there. That's very cool. Convocation's cooldown has been shortened now that the Necromancer no longer has a notable that grants cooldown recovery to it. Its life recovery is now a percentage of maximum life rather than a flat value. Hey, letting it scale to higher levels a little better. Haha! Those of you that are going to see my my potential build, my potential starter build for 3.8 that will not be a Necromancer, but will be a Summoner, you're going to like that. That's going to be great. I'm definitely going to include a Convocation if it's got percent-based life recovery now. That's perfect. That's awesome. I know that they took the Convocation node off of the Necromancer, and so on the one hand, that means that the Necromancer lost some of its appeal as being a summoner. At the same time, what that does is it frees up all of the other Ascendancies to actually play that archetype, which is one of the things I'm going to be trying out, I think, on launch. But anyway, let's keep going. Desecrate has had its cooldown removed and now has a shorter cast time. It has a shorter duration and a lower corpse limit now. But this will make it a much more reliable tool for both minion builds and builds that explode corpses. Offerings are now more reliable and easier to manage. They now have a higher base duration, gain an additional second for each corpse consumed, consume half as many corpses, interesting, and they have an ongoing marker over the player rather than on the ground, so you'll always know when they expire. Okay, so those of us that were wondering, hey, it looked like the offerings were now like hovering over you, floating over you in the videos, that's what that is. It's now that's essentially your visual cue if your offering is going to expire or not, which is really, really nice because it was tough to know a lot of the times if you relied on offerings a lot. It was tough to know without just paying attention and focusing in on that one area of the screen. It's nice to be able to look at your character and also know when your offering is going to expire. The Dead Reckoning unique jewel can now turn up to 15 skeleton warriors into mages, up from 5, and is now limited to 1. Wow! Using multiple copies of the jewel was an unnecessary cost for the power provided, and this should make the build more accessible as well. Hey, as long as you guys don't make Dead Reckoning, harder to access, harder to actually get, yes. There have been many changes to crafting modifiers that affect minions, including a new Atlas-specific base type, the Convoking Wand, which has an implicit that lets it roll new minion modifiers, which there are 8 different minion modifiers, for those of you that were wondering. Essence of Fear has been changed to match other minion bonuses, which means it grants higher values of increased minion damage on weapons. Incursion item minion modifiers have also been changed and improved. A new elemental resistance and minion elemental resistance crafted modifier has been added, and a new craftable minion movement speed modifier has been added. Mana for spellcasters. In 3.7, we changed Warlord's Mark to only apply its leech effects to attacks, as Mana Leech was one of the easiest ways to recover mana for intelligence characters, outclassing most other mana recovery mechanics with very little cost. In 3.8, we've changed all remaining sources of Mana Leech, either replacing the stats or changing them to only leech from attacks. Okay. This includes enchantments, the Mana Leech support, and unique items. The general philosophy is that mana sustain for spellcasters should be something a player has to think about and find some way to manage, similar to accuracy for attack characters. However, we don't want the situation to be a huge investment, and we've tried to provide a few different and interesting ways to sustain mana recovery. Mana flasks have received a major review. Values have been adjusted, recovering more mana and having more uses available, so they're more reliable for longer encounters. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, just out of curiosity, show of hands out there. Those of you down in the comments, just wave. You can say you wave. Were any of you complaining about mana flasks? It's just a complaint that I haven't read or seen anywhere. So if there was a discussion going on somewhere, it sounds like this was internal. It doesn't sound like this was something coming from the community. I'm not complaining. I'm just wondering if anybody has heard anybody say anything about negative about things about mana flasks. So this is interesting. So we've introduced a selection of new modifiers for mana flasks, including a new enduring modifier that lets the mana flask remain after reaching full mana at the cost of duration. Okay, interesting. Passives that affect mana flasks have been added or improved, including the new Essence Extraction notable that grants mana flasks 1 charge every 3 seconds, as well as mana regeneration, increased flask charges gained, and removing 1 random elemental ailment when you use a mana flask. Stats that subtracted from the final mana cost of skills made managing mana for certain channeled skills far too simple. Hey, Cyclone! Cyclone, we're looking at you, buddy! We've split these mods into a channeled and non-channeled skill version, with the channeled skill version granting a much smaller reduction. Okay, interesting. That's the nerf to Cyclone, I guess, at least in its mana cost. All right, the reduced mana support has also been reworked and now is the inspiration support. In addition to reducing mana cost, it now grants an inspiration charge each time you spend mana with the supported skill, up to 5 charges. The supported skill gains more elemental damage and critical chance for each inspiration charge. After spending more than a specified amount of mana, the inspiration charges are removed. This rewards you for investing in reducing the mana cost of your skills as much as possible to maximize the uptime of your inspiration. Clarity has also been changed to grant higher values of mana regeneration at higher gem levels. A variety of new passive tree clusters have been added, including one that improves mana and arcane surge, one that gives curse bonuses and a way to recover mana after hitting or killing cursed enemies, and one that grants spell damage based on your maximum mana up to a limit. So Indigen's got a passive node on the tree. Okay, I'm hearing lots of changes to the tree here. I mean, this is the balance manifesto, and this is as long as some patch notes. This is amazing. Melee. 3.7 introduced a whole host of changes and improvements to a variety of melee skills. This resulted in a lot of people playing Cyclone. Cyclone benefited from a combination of melee range and area modifiers in a way that let it surpass the area of effect of almost any other skill. Alongside all the other benefits that Cyclone has, rather than punishing other skills that use melee range, we've changed how Cyclone calculates its area, making the increased granted additive with other area increases. Okay, that's a good nerf, along with the mana nerf. That's good. This has meant that we've been able to provide more melee range on the passive tree. Master of the Arena, Brinkmanship, Bonebreaker, and Splitting Strikes now grant +2 melee range, up from +1. Cleaving, Flaying, and Claws of the Pride now grant +1 melee range. This will improve the area of static strikes, making them easier to use and more effective at taking on packs of enemies. Ancestral Call support has had its damage penalty lowered. Okay, I like it, resulting in no damage penalty at level 20 of the gem. This is to help further the clearing capacity of strike attacks. I like it. We've increased the base damage of multi-strike while lowering the bonuses for the second and third swing, so the skill is much less punitive if you perform 1 or 2 attacks. Multi-strike being cancelable is something we've decided to stick with, to keep melee characters more mobile. Multiplicative attack speed is very dangerous from both clear capacity, and performance. So we're reticent to give a single support gem anymore. Okay, so they don't want people crashing servers because they're attacking too fast. We've lowered the added physical damage on retaliation attacks because of how high their damage output could be when used with face breakers. Their base damage has been increased to compensate. Come on. Come on. How many people were out there using retaliation skills in POE this is 2019. How many people were actually out there using a bunch of these? Like, yes, there were a couple of builds that were being showed off, and the designers of those builds ought to be applauded for doing a great job of making what was widely regarded as an unusable skill usable. And now they're getting nerfed for it. That's a bummer. Pulverized support now provides increased area of effect instead of more area of effect. The skill provided too much area of effect for heavily invested characters, so we've changed the values to be additive with other area increases. The support now grants more damage than before to make up for the loss of area. Ranged. Tornado Shot has been outperforming other bow skills. You don't say? While also having potent single target damage. This is partially due to the power of the additional secondary projectiles enchantment. We've changed the enchantment to be from the Eternal Labyrinth only, and to grant +1 secondary projectiles down from 2. Ah! I'm sorry. I gotta laugh at that. Oh man, all those Tornado Shot Magic Find characters, like me, how I've built almost one in every single softcore league. Oh, that's funny. Down it goes. So that, I guess that's now legacy or done away with. We fixed a bug that meant the tornado, that the secondary projectiles from Fork could hit the target that they had forked from with certain skills. Oh, that's a pretty serious bug. For players, this only applied to Tornado Shot and Barrage. This provided a huge unintended damage bonus to these skills. Okay, so not only is Tornado Shot getting a nerf to its number of projectiles through the enchantment, but also apparently there was a bug that was giving us a bunch of extra damage that they've finally been able to pinpoint. So that's 2 hits, 2 strikes against Tornado Shot this league. Yikes. We've given added lightning damage to Lightning Arrow and added cold damage to Ice Shot to help them scale better throughout the game, and improved damage and projectile scaling on Split Arrow. Okay, interesting. So there's going to be some competitors for Magic Find Speedy Boys. We've also made some improvements to how all projectiles select targets when chaining. Previously, 2 projectiles from a single attack could attempt to chain to the same target, but only one would be able to hit. Now chaining projectiles won't attempt to chain to the same target unless no other targets are available, which significantly improves the clearing capabilities of chaining projectiles when used with additional projectiles. Interesting. Okay, cool. Other spells. Contagion no longer gains radius as the gem levels. Bummer. The skill provided too much clearing capacity over a large area at high levels. Body Swap has been significantly reworked. Okay, the most notable change is that you can target a living enemy to warp to their location, though the skill benefits from more area of effect and a corpse explosion when destroying a corpse. There are other mechanical damage changes that may make it more flexible and a powerful skill, especially when teleporting around a single target. Interesting. So maybe that old Poet's Pen build is coming back with Volatile Dead Body Swap. All right, passive tree changes. We've made a large number of changes to the passive tree in relation to mana, mines, bonuses for damage over time, poison, and more. Yeah, it sounds like the passive tree is going to look very different in 3.8. The mine passives have been almost completely reworked. The damage over time and poison clusters now have different stats and values, and there are a number of new mana clusters found on the passive tree. We've split the Flask Effect cluster that was near the Witch into 4 different passive clusters, granting Flask Effect alongside other effects. These are spread over the passive tree with a preference towards the dexterity area of the tree. As the Ranger has the strongest Flask association, each cluster has less Flask Effect than the old cluster, but in total there is now more Flask Effect on the passive tree than before. Interesting. So they didn't want Pathfinders to break the game, like Pathfinders always figure out a way to break the game using flasks. We've raised the base radius of all traditional aura skills and lowered the bonus from increased area of effect of aura skills on the tree. This is because these passive stats will also apply to mind skills as they count as aura skills. The passives are still great choices for mind characters being more powerful than other generic area of effect increases, but don't have values more than twice the numbers seen elsewhere. We're also giving Smite more radius as the gem levels. That's exciting for those of us that maybe want to try out Herald of Purity plus Smite Summoning Boys. As its area of effect was balanced around the aura area of effect passives. We've added a new power charge cluster similar to Endurance and Frenzy charges added in 3.7. Clusters introduced in 3.7 that gave increased attributes have been moved so they are no longer in radius of any jewel sockets. As these clusters skewered the power level of certain unique jewels too heavily. Yeah, they did. As a result, Tempered Flesh and Transcendent Flesh now have 7% critical strike multiplier per unallocated strength and radius, up from 5%. Tempered Mind and Transcendent Mind now have 125 accuracy rating per unallocated intelligence and radius, up from 100. Okay, this should make them a tempting choice in more locations on the tree. Changes to various ascendancies. We've made a host of changes to a variety of ascendancies. Oh, goodness. Most notable are the Necromancer, Saboteur, and Assassin to go alongside changes and additions to their standard skill archetypes. You can see these here, here, and here. Other ascendancies have been touched to a lesser degree. That's just a funny sentence. I'm sorry. Other ascendancies have been touched to a lesser degree for a few different reasons. Like, you can almost imagine the passive tree sitting in court, and the lawyer says, all right, passive tree, show me where GGG touched you in your ascendancy. He touched me to a lesser extent over here. Sorry. Below are some of the notable changes. Our intent is to have fewer passives that take an underused skill or mechanic and give it the tools needed to see use. We're moving these effects onto the skills themselves as they level, and are providing more generally useful bonuses that still keep the same theme. The Necromancer redesign is the most obvious design of this, and we've also changed the Guardian so he no longer grants specific bonuses to Herald of Purity and Dominating Blow minions, and have built the Crusade Slam effect into the minions themselves. We'll likely do this more as a part of future reworks. Okay, for a second, I just got to rant here for a second. This is good. This is a good thing, okay? For a couple of years now, we've said, hey, look, ascendancies are taking on too much of the form of you need to pick this specific ascendancy if you're going to play this specific skill. For instance, case in point, Necromancer. If you were playing Spectre, Skeleton, or Zombies, or if you were playing Golems and you weren't playing the Elementalist, like, there just wasn't a reason to necessarily play those other ascendancies. There just wasn't, because there were better options in the ascendancy that had tags specifically to those particular skills. So what this actually does, for those of us that have played Path of Exile for longer than the last year, is what that did is it actually killed a long-standing design principle inside Path of Exile, which was freedom to the players. Freedom of choice, freedom of options to say, look, if you want to play a big, super tanky guy, but make him a spellcaster, you can do that. If you want to play a super duper squishy witch that's like melee oriented and gets in there and fights with axes and daggers, you can do that, right? These sorts of archetypes that were traditional fantasy archetypes that are forced in other games, I'm not going to name any other games in specific right now, but that are forced in other games that are class-based systems, that was not there in PoE, right? And that was especially not there before Ascendancies came into being. And Ascendancies more and more have turned into these, hey, if you're going to play this skill, then you need to pick this particular Ascendancy. And so the fact that they're pulling off these power levels from the Ascendancy, they're not getting rid of the power levels. A lot of people have said, oh, Necromancer's been nerfed, blah, 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 or Skeletons have been nerfed, or Spectres have been nerfed. No. The same power level is available, but it's not tied to the Ascendancy, meaning you can choose another Ascendancy but still play that style of build, which means you're opened up to a whole new host. Like, in the last day and a half, I have been looking at so many different Necromancer builds that were just Necromancer Summoner builds prior to this particular league, prior to this particular rework. And now I'm looking at every single Ascendancy going, all of these Ascendancies potentially have something to offer to me because I'm not tied specifically to one Ascendancy. So I think this is a good thing. Leave me a comment if you think this is good or not. The Hierophant's mana path has been changed, and as a result of a review of all mana mechanics, it should be more offensively powerful for a character with heavy mana investment now, with its defensive power slightly reduced. Interesting. The Elementalist has had its Golem path adjusted, providing much more power to the player on an invested Golem character. Okay, so those of you that want to play Golemancers, that's good news for you. While no longer being the only way for a character to get additional Golems outside of unique items, thanks to the new Golem cluster on the passive tree, it should be a more desirable path for builds that don't rely entirely on their minions as a result. Beacon of Ruin now grants increased effect of non-damaging ailments to improve its power overall. The Raider received some numerical improvements and one additional aura mechanic to make it more competitive, but will receive more changes in the future to give it more unique features. Interesting. So the Raider, they're saying, hey, look, maybe we're slow rolling the Raider changes, like with each league, rather than saying, hey, we're going to commit to a fourth Ascendancy that we're going to really grill and change in 3.8. We're going to tweak the Raider a little bit now, and we'll change it some more in the future. That's interesting. And that's actually, frankly, it's good news for anybody that was hoping for the Raider changes to be bigger than what they actually were in this patch. The Occultist's Vile Bastion now grants 40 energy shield regenerated per second at all times, granting more reliable recovery, especially at lower levels. Okay, the Occultist that was nerfed to 6 feet under the ground slightly came up a few inches, but is still several feet under the ground. The Chieftain now provides plus 25% to fire damage over time multiplier instead of 15% more burning damage, providing more power for burning characters unless they are very heavily invested in damage over time multiplier. The Berserker and Slayer were a little too generically powerful for attack builds, so some nodes have had their values adjusted. Read that as nerfed. The Slayer's Bane of Legends node has had the value of attack and move speed granted reduced to 10%. Overwhelm has had its base critical strike chance lowered to 7.5%. The Berserker's Crave the Slaughter no longer grants a chance to deal double damage. Ouch. With this bonus being moved to Warbringer if you used a war cry in the past 8 seconds. Flawless Savagery now grants a lower value of critical strike chance for attacks and slightly less critical multiplier. The Trickster's Ghost Dance passive was providing a bit too much defense for a single notable, so the chance to evade, reduce damage taken, and amount of energy shield recovered have all been lowered. Okay, there you go. There's the nerf hammer. Nobody's playing Trickster anymore. Sorry, Tarkat. Sorry, Tarky. Sorry. Trickster's not going to be meta this league. Sorry, buddy. The Ascendant has had passives related to many of the adjusted ascendancies above changed. For example, the Saboteur notable now provides more elemental penetration than before, and the Necromancer node now penalizes offerings on you less and grants additional area of effect if you've consumed a corpse recently. Veiled modifiers. We've made a number of changes to making unlocking veiled modifiers easier. Okay, that sounds very, very promising. Let's see what they actually say. Modifiers granted only by items from specific syndicate members now require half as many unveils to learn the craft. Hey, that's great news. They're also more likely to appear as one of the potential modifiers. Modifiers only found on less common item types or that are limited to only 1 or 2 item types are much more likely to appear as unveiling options. Flask modifiers unveiled only from the unique flask from the Syndicate Mastermind now only require a single unveil to unlock. The intent is that it shouldn't be necessary for a character to learn every single crafting recipe each league, but we want to make it easier to get a specific modifier if you'd like to craft. We'll continue to monitor the results of this change. Hey, so they're listening to us as we give feedback, read, complain about veiled modifiers. That's good news. Other changes. Packs of monsters that spawn with rare monsters now have a single shared modifier from the rare, as well as more life, damage, experience, and item rewards. This will make a rare monster encounter more rewarding and able to provide greater challenges. Monster accuracy has been lowered as 3.7's accuracy evasion calculation changed resulted in monsters being noticeably more likely to hit a character with medium investment in evasion. This change brings an evasion-focused character back to the previous evade chance against monsters, though characters with low evasion will still be more likely to get hit than prior to 3.7. We've also reduced the chance for a league mechanic that drops a random unique to drop a league-specific unique. This ended up being the most common source of league-specific uniques in some leagues. Okay, interesting. We've increased the speed that the breach expands in the endgame breach domains. Good. This lets you clear through a breach domain faster than before. We've increased the amount of time that you start with in elemental and physical breaches in the endgame breach domains to compensate for this faster expansion. So you'll have just as much time total to complete the breach. The amount of time that you start with in a chaos breach domain has not changed, and thus will be slightly more challenging. We've improved life scaling on the bosses to be more consistent across all levels, increased density of monsters in the breach domains, removed the increased life mod from the breach domains, and increased the life of the monsters in the breach domains to compensate. This will even out the challenge in pure breach domains. Prior to this challenge, the bosses of the physical and chaos breaches had less life than the elemental breach bosses in pure breach domains. Yeah, that was awful. It was absolutely awful. Just from a challenge standpoint, it just didn't make any sense. We've made adjustments to a large variety of unique items based on their use. For example, Poet's Pen triggered spell now has a cooldown of 0.5 seconds, down from 0.25 seconds. It now only triggers on finishing an attack rather than on starting an attack because of animation canceling. Blasphemer's Grasp now gives plus 4% to damage over time multiplier for ailments for each Elder item equipped, increased of 15% increased damage with ailments. That concludes all the major balance changes we're wanting to discuss today. There are many other smaller changes that you'll be able to read about in the patch notes tomorrow. Hopefully you've enjoyed this look at the upcoming balance changes, and we look forward to playing with you all in the upcoming Blight League. From Natalia, GGG. Okay, there we go. So that's the balance manifesto. Wow, there is a lot there. I'm just going to say that Poet's Pen build, yeah, I think that's coming back with the new Necromancer. Man, the melee changes, it sounds like they're still committed to changing them. Yes, Cyclone got a nerf. Tornado Shot got a nerf. And it seems like almost every Ascendancy got touched in some way. And my big takeaway from this, when the passive tree information comes out, it is going to look very, very different than what we are looking right now at 3.7, which on the one hand is a really, really good thing because it means new flavor and new opportunities to make builds. And that's one of the things that I am excited for most. And speaking of which, tomorrow morning, in just a couple hours time, I'll be coming out with at least one build that I'm considering for my Path of Exile Blight League starter. But anyway, drop a comment with all of your thoughts, all of your feedback for what you think is going on with the Path of Exile Blight League development manifesto and balance patch notes. So I'm very, very excited. We're just a couple days away. It's not here yet, and I'm actually glad. This is the first league that I'm actually glad that today is not the league day, because obviously we need patch notes and I need more time to plan out all of the different builds that I want to play, like just within the first couple of weeks of the league, let alone throughout the entirety of the league. So I'm stoked, I'm hyped. Hopefully you are as well, and I hope that September 6th or 7th is when a Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.